I didn't realize how disposable I was until Christmas Eve, when my parents handed my sister the keys to a luxury high-rise apartment while a camera recorded her reaction, and then slid me a single key taped to a storage unit receipt. They smiled like it was reasonable, like this was balance, like I wasn't standing there holding proof that I'd been quietly archived from my own family. That night didn't just crack something open. It exposed forged paperwork, erased assets, and a legacy that had been rewritten without my name, and what I did next ensured none of them slept peacefully again. Before I tell you how it all unraveled, do me a small favor. Follow the page and comment where you're listening from. It helps these stories reach people who need them more than they realize. My name is Alara Wynn. I landed in Harbourcrest just before sunset, the sky bruised purple and gray, snow crusting the edges of the runway. The flight from Rainford had been delayed twice, long enough for doubt to creep in and ask why I was even doing this. I hadn't planned to come home for the holidays. Not this year. But obligation has a way of disguising itself as responsibility, and eventually you stop questioning the weight and just carry it. The house looked exactly the same. Warm lights glowing through the windows, wreaths hung with precise symmetry, the familiar scent of cinnamon and pine thick in the air. Laughter spilled out before I even opened the door. My mother, Marianne, was in the kitchen wearing her embroidered holiday apron, pouring spice cider into matching mugs. My father, Grant, hovered near the fireplace, phone raised, trying to capture moments he rarely participated in. And my sister, Cyril, stood by the tree, already radiant, already centered, like gravity itself bent toward her. "Alara!" Marianne called when she saw me. "You made it just in time for the surprise." Something in her smile felt rehearsed, polished. I slipped off my boots, brushed the snow from my coat, and stepped into the living room. The furniture had been rearranged into a neat semicircle. Grant clapped his hands like an MC. "All right, everyone gather around. Let's make this special." My chest tightened. Cyril stepped forward, eyes bright, as Grant handed her a silver-wrapped box with an elaborate ribbon. Even before she opened it, I knew. She untied the bow slowly, theatrically, and lifted the lid. Keys. Not just keys, sleek, modern, heavy. A custom keychain dangled from the ring, etched with the outline of a high-rise building downtown. She gasped, hand flying to her mouth. "No way," she breathed. Marian beamed. "It's the place you kept talking about. The one overlooking the river. We closed last week." Applause erupted. Someone started filming. Glasses clinked. A neighbor laughed and said, "Now that's a holiday gift." I smiled because that's what you do in families like mine. You smile while something inside you goes quiet. Then Grant turned to me. "And for our practical one," he said, pulling a small envelope from his pocket, "we thought this would be useful." I opened it. Inside was a rental agreement, a single metal key, a white tag labeled, Unit B17 North Shore Storage. My heart didn't break. It stalled. "Your holiday surprise," Marianne said brightly. "You're always so organized, Alara. This is just for the things you don't need right now." I nodded. "Thank you." My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Cyril wandered over, still holding her condo keys like a trophy. She nudged my shoulder lightly. "Open your other gift. I told Mom you've been cooking more." She handed me a box. Inside was a copper cookware set, scratched in the exact places I remembered. My initials were still etched under the handles. I donated that set to the family lake house years ago. It wasn't new. It wasn't thoughtful. "I thought you said you were experimenting with recipes," Cyril said cheerfully, sipping champagne. I stared at the storage, key in my palm. Cold, heavy, final. Conversation swirled around me. Views from the balcony, the building's concierge, Cyril's next chapter. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even sad. I felt suspended, like someone had cropped me out of a photograph and expected me not to notice. At dinner, I took a seat at the far end of the table. man beside me leaned over and smiled apologetically. "Sorry, I thought you were a cousin or something. I don't think I've seen you in any of her family posts." "I'm her sister," I said. His eyes widened. "Oh, wow." He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. I glanced down the hallway at the framed photos lining the wall. One from last summer caught my eye. A barbecue I remembered clearly. I'd flown in, helped set up, grilled corn everyone praised. "In the photo!" Cyril stood between our parents, smiling. I wasn't there. Dinner rolled on. I mentioned a project I'd led at work. Silence. Grant nodded vaguely, then asked Cyril if she'd thought more about opening a gallery. That was when my phone vibrated beneath the table. Credit alert. New inquiry detected. I frowned. I hadn't applied for anything. As Marian stood and said, "It's such a blessing to have family like this," something cold settled in my chest. Because blessings don't require erasure. And storage, keys don't come with applause. That night, alone in the guest room that still smelled faintly of cedar and old paint, I opened the alert. Mortgage inquiry. Residential. Harborcrest. My name. That was when the silence stopped feeling accidental. And the story finally began to change. I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry. Anger would have been easier, but because my mind kept replaying patterns I'd ignored for years, now stitched together into something sharp and unmistakable. At 2:14 a.m., I sat on the edge of the narrow guest bed, laptop open, the glow reflecting off the faded wallpaper I'd memorized as a teenager. The credit alert stared back at me like an accusation. Residential mortgage inquiry. Lender. North Lake Property Finance. Location. Harborcrest. I hadn't applied for anything. I hadn't even discussed moving. But my credit history, my work, my discipline, my reliability had been pulled like it belonged to someone else. I logged into my financial dashboard. It took less than 5 minutes to confirm what my body already knew. There it was. A pre-approval letter. Borrower, Elara Wynn. Property owner, pending Cyril Wynn. My fingers went cold. They hadn't gifted her a condo. They'd leveraged me. I paced the room slowly, careful not to let the floorboards creak. Down the hall, I could hear laughter. Cyril's voice floating above the others, bright and effortless, like she hadn't just been handed a future financed by my silence. I sat back down and pulled up the login history on my account. 3 access points. Same IP address. Same device signature. My father's desktop. The one in his home office. The one I'd used years ago when he helped me recover a password after I'd locked myself out. Apparently, he never logged out. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. Memories surfaced, not dramatic ones, just small, unremarkable moments that now felt surgical in hindsight. The summer my bedroom was quietly reassigned because Cyril needed space to create. The way family photos always seemed to catch her best angles while I hovered just outside the frame. The holidays where my achievements were summarized in a sentence, while her moods became full discussions. I had mistaken consistency for fairness. I closed the laptop and slipped the storage unit key onto the nightstand. It landed with a soft metallic sound that felt louder than it should have. That key wasn't about organization. It was about containment. Morning came without ceremony. No one knocked. No one checked on me. I heard chairs scrape downstairs, dishes clink, the low hum of brunch being assembled without my name in the head count. When I finally walked into the dining room, the table was already full. Every chair occupied, every place set, except one. Marian looked up briefly. "Oh, sweetheart, we didn't expect so many people." Grant grabbed the folding chair. He pulled a metal chair from the hallway closet and wedged it awkwardly at the corner of the table. "You don't mind," he said lightly. "You're always so flexible." Flexible. That word again. I sat. No napkin. No cutlery. Just a plate placed directly on the wood, like an afterthought. Cyril didn't look up from her phone. Brunch moved forward as if nothing was unusual. Conversations overlapped. Plans were made. Laughter filled spaces I no longer occupied. At one point, Marianne raised her glass. "Isn't it wonderful having family this close?" I swallowed my coffee slowly. After brunch, while everyone drifted toward the living room, I caught Marianne alone in the kitchen. She was wiping the counter with unnecessary precision. "I saw the mortgage inquiry," I said quietly. Her hand stopped. She didn't turn around. "Ilara." "My credit," I continued. "My name, used without permission." She sighed, like I'd inconvenienced her. "You have stability. Cyril doesn't. We assumed." "You assumed I wouldn't say no." That made her turn. "You always land on your feet," she said gently. "Cyril struggles. And I don't." I asked, "Or do I just struggle quietly enough to be useful?" She didn't answer. Later, I found Cyril leaning against the kitchen island, scrolling through comments on her phone. "Don't make this weird," she said without looking at me. "It's supposed to be a happy holiday." "You should check the paperwork," I replied calmly. "See whose name is actually carrying that happiness." She froze for half a second. It was subtle, but I saw it. Back in the guest room, I packed slowly. Not angrily. Methodically. From my bag, I pulled out a document I'd prepared months earlier but never expected to use. A revocation of financial access. Signed. Dated. Legal. I slid it under my father's office door without knocking. As I walked away, I heard voices through the kitchen door. "Do you think she knows?" Marianne whispered. Grant's reply was dismissive. "Even if she does, what's she going to do about it?" I smiled to myself, because for the first time, I wasn't asking that question. That afternoon, I drove to the storage unit. Unit B17. Inside were boxes labeled Cyril, studio, decor, miscellaneous. Not one thing belonged to me. The gift wasn't storage. It was liability. I took photos. Every angle. Every label. Evidence doesn't need emotion. It needs clarity. That night, back at the house, I returned the cookware set, unopened, to the donation bin by the door. Marianne's smile faltered. "Sometimes," I said evenly, "the best gifts are the ones you don't accept." The room went quiet. Not shocked. Uneasy. That's when I knew. They weren't afraid of confrontation. They were afraid of documentation. And I had already started collecting it. That night, the house didn't sleep the way it used to. The laughter was thinner. The silences longer. Every sound felt measured, as if everyone was waiting for someone else to move first. I stayed in the guest room. Door locked, laptop open again. The cursor blinked at the top of a blank document while my thoughts arranged themselves with frightening clarity. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't panicking. I was inventorying. Dates. Accounts. Access points. Assets. The first thing I did was change every password. Banking. Credit bureaus. Investment platforms. Even old email accounts I hadn't touched in years. Then I enabled multi-factor authentication on everything. If anyone tried to get in again, I'd know immediately. At 11:47 p.m., an alert came through. Unsuccessful login attempt detected. Location: Harborcrest. Device unknown. I stared at the screen until the corners of my mouth lifted, not in satisfaction, not in triumph, but recognition. They were already scrambling. The next morning, I woke early and left the house before anyone noticed. I drove downtown, the road slick with overnight frost, my hand steady on the wheel. I wasn't going to confront anyone again until I had leverage that couldn't be talked over, minimized, or explained away. My attorney's office sat above a bakery, the smell of bread rising through the stairwell like something grounded and reassuring. She didn't interrupt once as I laid everything out. The credit inquiry, the login records, the storage unit, the old investment property I'd helped fund years ago. When I finished, She leaned back slightly and folded her hands. They didn't just cross a family boundary, she said calmly. They crossed several legal ones. I exhaled for the first time in hours. She explained the next steps without drama. Cease and desist letters. Fraud documentation. A temporary freeze on any property transfer involving my credit. Quiet actions. Surgical ones. Do not warn them, she added. Let the paperwork speak. By the time I left her office, my phone was buzzing with missed calls. Grant. Marianne. Cyril. I didn't answer. Back at the house, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to brittle. Marianne hovered near the kitchen like she was guarding something. Grant avoided eye contact. Cyril sat on the couch, scrolling aggressively, her knee bouncing. You went somewhere, Marianne said, too casually. Yes, I replied, setting my keys down. I needed air. Grant cleared his throat. We should talk. We will, I said. Just not yet. That unsettled them more than anger would have. Later that afternoon, a courier arrived. 3 envelopes. 1 addressed to Grant. 1 to Marianne. 1 to Cyril. I didn't hand them over with ceremony. I placed them on the table, one by one, then sat down. The room filled with the soft sounds of paper opening. Grant went pale first. Marianne followed. Cyril read faster than the others. Eyes scanning, breath shallow. What is this? She demanded. Documentation, I said evenly. And notice. Grant stood. You didn't have to do this like this. You didn't have to do it at all, I replied. Marianne's voice shook. We were going to tell you. When? I asked. After the mortgage finalized? After the liability transferred fully? No one answered. Cyril slammed the papers down. This ruins everything. I tilted my head. You mean it exposes it? That evening, the house became unbearably quiet. No music, no TV, just doors closing softly, footsteps retreating. I packed the rest of my things without rushing. As I zipped my suitcase, my phone buzzed again. New alert. Credit freeze request processed. Good. I left the next morning before sunrise. No goodbye. No confrontation. Just absence. 3 days later, the fallout began. The lender flagged the mortgage application for fraud. The condo transfer was frozen. The investment property deed was pulled for review. Marianne called, voice breaking. This is destroying the family. I replied calmly, no. This is revealing it. Grant sent an email longer than it needed to be. Apologies wrapped in explanations. Intentions framed as misunderstandings. I forwarded it to my attorney. Cyril went public. She posted a video. Soft lighting. Red eyes. Carefully curated vulnerability. Sometimes, she said into the camera, people project their stress onto others. I hope my sister finds peace. The comments flooded in. Poor thing. Family drama is the worst. Stay strong. I didn't respond. Instead, I gathered more evidence. Old bank statements. Email trails. A voicemail Marianne once left me by mistake, laughing about how I was independent enough not to need anything. Patterns matter. A week later, the official letters landed. Cease and desist. Notice of investigation. Temporary injunctions. Grant showed up at my apartment unannounced. I didn't raise you to be cruel, he said, standing in my doorway. You raised me to be careful, I replied. This is careful. His shoulders sagged. You could have just asked. I did, I said quietly. For years. You just never listened. He left without another word. 2 days after that, Cyril called from a number I didn't recognize. You think you won, she snapped. But you just made yourself the villain. I didn't make anything, I replied. I documented it. Silence. Then softer. You always had everything. I closed my eyes. I had responsibility. There's a difference. When the line went dead, I didn't feel relief. I felt finality. The condo never closed. The investment property was restored to its original ownership structure, minus my name, at my request. And the family trust? Severed. I wasn't erased anymore. I was untangled. By the time winter ended, I was living somewhere new. New routines. New silence. The good kind. One afternoon, an email arrived from my attorney. All obligations cleared. No further financial exposure. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I closed the laptop, because the most dangerous thing I'd done wasn't filing paperwork. It was stopping the quiet obedience they'd mistaken for consent. By the time spring arrived, the noise had faded, but the damage had settled into permanent shape. Silence isn't empty when you earn it. It's solid, protective. Mine wrapped around me like insulation I didn't know I'd been missing. My new apartment was small, deliberately so. No guest room. No just-in-case space. Everything inside it had a purpose, including the quiet. I unpacked slowly, choosing where things belonged instead of defaulting to where they'd always gone. It felt symbolic, even if I didn't admit that out loud. The first message came from Marianne. Not a call, not an apology, a question. Did you really have to involve lawyers? I stared at it for a long time before typing. Yes. No explanation. No justification. Just truth. She didn't reply. Grant waited longer. Almost 2 weeks. When he finally reached out, his tone had changed. Less authority. More uncertainty. We're meeting with our attorney tomorrow, he wrote. We need clarity. I smiled at the word. Clarity. They'd had decades of it. They'd just never offered me any. Cyril tried a different approach. She sent a handwritten letter. Not an apology, something more dangerous. Reflection. She wrote about pressure, about expectations, about how she'd always been afraid that if she didn't shine loudly enough, she'd disappear. She said she never thought of me as erased, just permanent, reliable. There. I didn't think you'd leave, she wrote. I thought you'd always stay. That line sat with me longer than anything else she'd said, because it was the truest thing she'd ever admitted. I didn't reply. I was busy building a life that didn't depend on proximity to people who mistook access for entitlement. The legal process moved quietly but relentlessly. Audits uncovered more than expected. Small inconsistencies, overlaps, assumptions that relied on my silence to function. One afternoon, my attorney called. They're trying to negotiate, she said. For what? I asked. Your cooperation. I laughed once, short and sharp. I already gave that. They abused it. We declined. Weeks passed. Then consequences arrived, not dramatically but decisively. Grant's line of credit was reduced. Marianne's name was removed from 2 shared accounts, pending review. Cyril's condo listing disappeared from public records. She called me the night it happened. Not angry. Panicked. They froze everything, she said. I can't move forward. You moved forward before, I replied calmly. Just without me. She cried. Not theatrically. Genuinely. And for a moment, just a moment, I almost softened. Then I remembered the storage unit key, the missing seat, the altered documents, and I let the silence stretch. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. I answered honestly. You can't. Not with me. She hung up without saying goodbye. The family group chat went quiet after that. No passive-aggressive holiday gifts. No checking in. Just absence. And I didn't chase it. Instead, something unexpected happened. People reached out. A cousin I barely knew apologized for never speaking up. An aunt admitted she'd noticed the imbalance years ago, but didn't want to rock the boat. A neighbor sent a message saying, I always wondered why you weren't in the photos. I accepted the acknowledgments without bitterness. Validation doesn't fix the past, but it does confirm you weren't imagining it. Late one evening, as I sorted paperwork into a final archive folder, I found an old email draft I'd never sent. It was addressed to Marianne. Written years ago. It said, I don't need more. I just want to be counted. I deleted it, not because it was wrong, because I no longer needed it to be read. 3 months after I left, Grant showed up again. This time he called first. Just 10 minutes, he said. Please. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him in a neutral place. A cafe. Public. Bright. He looked older. Smaller. He didn't sit right away. I underestimated you, he said finally. Yes, I replied. He nodded like he deserved that. We thought you didn't mind, he continued. You never complained. I did, I said. You just didn't hear it because it wasn't loud. He swallowed. You've made it very clear where you stand. I made it very clear where I was always standing. I corrected. You just stepped in front of me. He stared down at his hands. We're losing more than money, he said quietly. I didn't respond. Because the truth was, they'd already lost me long before the paperwork ever began. When we parted, he didn't ask for forgiveness. And that, at least, told me he was learning something. That night, I stood in my apartment and looked around. Every bill in my name. Every object chosen by me. Every boundary intact. The story hadn't ended, but it had shifted. And for the first time, the next chapter belonged entirely to me. There's a strange moment that comes after you cut a cord that's been tight your whole life. Not relief, not peace, something quieter, like realizing you've been holding your breath for years and only now noticing oxygen. That's where I was when the second letter arrived. This one wasn't from Cyril. It wasn't from Grant or Marianne either. It came from the family attorney. Formal, polite, heavy with implications. They were contesting my separation from the trust, not because they wanted me back, but because removing me had destabilized everything else. I read the letter twice, then laughed, not out loud, just internally, that slow, incredulous laugh you make when irony finally stops being subtle. They didn't miss me. They missed what I held together. My attorney didn't laugh. She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled, eyes sharp. They assumed you'd never pull your weight away, she said. Now the structure is sagging. What happens next? I asked. They'll try to pressure you. Emotionally first. Then legally. They'll frame it as reconciliation. I nodded. Let them try. The first move came disguised as concern. Marian showed up at my door, unannounced. I didn't open it at first. I watched through the peephole as she shifted her weight, adjusted her scarf, practiced an expression that looked appropriately remorseful. When I finally opened the door, she exhaled like she'd been holding something back. You look tired, she said. I smiled politely. I wasn't expecting company. I won't stay long, she replied quickly. I just needed to see you. She stepped inside without waiting for permission. I noticed everything immediately. How her eyes scanned the apartment. How she clocked the furniture. The lack of family photos. The absence of heirlooms. You've simplified, she said. I've clarified, I corrected. She nodded as if that made sense. We sat. She didn't touch the tea I offered. I never meant for things to go this far, she began. That's the problem, I said calmly. You never meant for them to go anywhere at all. Her lips pressed together. You've always been independent, she said. We thought you preferred distance. I preferred honesty, I replied. Distance was the result of not getting it. She looked down at her hands. We did what we thought was best for the family. And I wasn't part of that equation, I said. She flinched. You're part of us, she insisted softly. That never changed. I stood. It changed when my name disappeared from documents I helped build, I said. It changed when my credit became leverage without my consent. It changed when silence became expectation. She finally looked up, eyes wet. What do you want? She asked. The question felt heavy, loaded with years of unspoken bargaining. I want you to stop asking that, I said, because the answer was always the same. You just never liked how simple it was. She left 10 minutes later. She didn't hug me. She didn't apologize. And for the first time, I didn't feel disappointed. The next move was louder. Grant tried to frame it as practicality. He emailed me spreadsheets, projections, risk analyses, all designed to show how my absence would negatively affect shared outcomes. I forwarded the email to my attorney without comment. Her response was swift. Tell him further contact should go through counsel. I did. He stopped writing. Cyril didn't. Her messages came erratic, emotional, oscillating between guilt and resentment. You're punishing us. You don't understand what this is doing to me. They're pressuring me. I replied once. This is what happens when support is mistaken for entitlement. She didn't respond. 2 weeks later, the truth surfaced. Not through confession, but through exposure. An audit flagged inconsistencies in older property transfers. My name had been removed earlier than I realized. Quietly, strategically, years before the condo. The realization didn't hurt the way I expected. It didn't feel sharp. It felt clarifying. I hadn't been excluded suddenly. I'd been phased out. The family meeting happened without me. I found out afterward through a forwarded email chain accidentally sent to my address. Grant arguing, Marion crying, Cyril insisting she didn't ask for this, the attorney recommending settlement, and then one line that stayed with me. We underestimated how much she anchored everything. I read it twice, not for validation, for closure. They had finally named my role. Just too late. The call from my attorney came the following Monday. They want mediation, she said. Under what terms? I asked. Restoration of partial benefits. Apology language. Non-disclosure. I considered it, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to understand the shape of their regret. And what do I get? I asked. Leverage, she said honestly. I shook my head. I already have peace. We declined. That's when things turned. Not violent. Not dramatic. Just inconvenient. Accounts froze. Projects stalled. Properties went unsold. The machine that had relied on my quiet compliance began grinding against itself. Cyril posted a vague message online about betrayal and boundaries. People commented. Some supported her. Others asked questions. Questions she couldn't answer without telling the truth. She deleted the post within hours. One evening, as I cooked dinner, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. This is Jolene. From storage. My heart stilled. Yes. I replied. There was an attempt to remove items from Unit C24, she wrote. Your sister was here. My hand tightened around the phone. She said it was hers, Jolene continued. But the lease is still in your name. I stopped the release. I exhaled slowly. Thank you, I typed. Please document everything. Already done, she replied. That was the moment something shifted permanently inside me. Not anger. Authority. I forwarded the message to my attorney. Then I did something I'd never done before. I blocked Cyril. Fully. Every channel. Not out of spite. Out of finality. The house I grew up in sold 2 months later. Not for what they expected. Not without complications. I didn't attend the closing. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't need to. I had already moved out of the story. The last message came from Grant. Short. Measured. We didn't know how to fix this without you. I read it once. Then deleted it. Because the truth was simple. They never tried to fix it with me. They just assumed I'd stay broken quietly. I didn't. And that changed everything. By the time spring crept into the city, I stopped waking up expecting an apology. That surprised me. For most of my life, I had carried a quiet hope that one day someone would sit across from me, look me in the eyes, and say, we see what we did. Not excuse it. Not soften it. Just name it. But hope, I learned, is often just another way we postpone acceptance. Acceptance arrived without ceremony. It came in the form of silence that stayed silent. No more emails. No more forwarded chains. No more indirect messages through distant relatives pretending to check in for my sake. At first, the absence felt strange, like walking into a room where a machine has been humming for years and suddenly gone quiet. You keep waiting for the noise to return, convinced the stillness can't last. But it did. And slowly, something else filled the space. Clarity. I didn't realize how much emotional energy I had spent managing other people's comfort until no one expected me to anymore. I cooked without rushing, slept without replaying conversations, made decisions without anticipating resistance. I stopped explaining myself. That was when the legal aftermath fully unfolded. My attorney called one afternoon, her voice calm but alert. "They're unraveling faster than expected," she said. "How so?" I asked. The trust restructuring exposed inconsistencies going back nearly a decade. Some assets were moved without proper authorization. Others were co-signed under assumptions that no longer hold. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, and I asked, and once one thread pulled, everything else followed. I closed my eyes. This wasn't satisfaction. It was inevitability. The first official notice arrived a week later, an audit request tied to property taxes and loan guarantees. My name was no longer attached, but the absence itself raised flags. Institutions don't like gaps. They don't like unexplained removals. They especially don't like discovering that the person who had kept everything balanced was quietly erased instead of formally released. I thought of all the times I'd signed documents without reading every line because I trusted the people handing them to me. Trust, it turns out, leaves a paper trail when it's broken. Marianne called again. This time I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice trembled, not with remorse but fear. "This is getting out of control," she said. "You need to help us fix this." I deleted it without replying, because the truth was simple. They weren't asking for reconciliation. They were asking for repair work. And I no longer worked there. Cyril tried a different approach. She sent a handwritten letter. No return address. I recognized the envelope immediately. Cream paper. Slightly slanted handwriting. Deliberate. I waited 3 days before opening it. She wrote about pressure. About expectations. About always being the fragile one. She said she never asked for me to disappear. She said she didn't realize how much she'd taken until it was gone. She said she missed me. She didn't say sorry. Not once. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I put it in a drawer and closed it. Some apologies aren't incomplete. They're evasive. The next escalation came from an unexpected direction. The storage unit. Jolene called again, this time sounding uneasy. "They came back," she said. "Your parents. Together." My jaw tightened. "They said they had authority," she continued. "But the documentation didn't match. We refused access again." "Did they argue?" I asked. "Not loudly," she said, "but they seemed shocked, like they didn't realize the lock wasn't theirs anymore." I thanked her and hung up. Then I did something I hadn't planned on doing. I drove there. The storage facility looked the same as it always had. Gray concrete, numbered doors, fluorescent lights humming faintly overhead. But standing there now felt different. I wasn't arriving as the caretaker. I was arriving as the owner. I unlocked the unit and stepped inside. The boxes were still stacked along the walls, untouched since my last visit. Labels in my mother's handwriting. Old paint cans. Canvas frames warped from humidity. This place had never been about storage. It had been about control. Who held the keys? Who carried the burden? Who stayed quiet? I walked through the unit slowly, then pulled out my phone and took photos of everything. Not out of paranoia, out of documentation. Then I locked the door, returned the key to Jolene, and transferred the lease out of my name entirely. The final tie. When I got back to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Grant. "Please call me." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I blocked the number. The fallout didn't explode. It seeped. Relatives began calling each other, not me. Accounts were frozen pending review. Sales stalled. Lawyers requested statements. The family narrative cracked, not because I spoke, but because silence removed their buffer. I had always been the intermediary, the translator, the stabilizer. Without me, they had to face institutions that didn't care about history or emotion. Only facts. One afternoon, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years at a cafe downtown, a former neighbor. She looked surprised, then relieved. "I wondered when you'd finally step away," she said casually. I blinked. "What do you mean?" I asked. She sipped her coffee. "Oh, honey," she said gently. "Everyone saw it. You were always carrying more than your share." The words landed heavier than any accusation, because they confirmed what I had spent years denying. I wasn't invisible. I was convenient. The next letter came from the family attorney. This one wasn't strategic. It was defensive. They proposed a settlement, financial compensation, a confidentiality clause, a restoration of my name, symbolic, not functional. I forwarded it to my attorney with a single sentence. "No interest." Her reply was immediate. "Understood. Then we wait." Waiting used to scare me. It doesn't anymore. Because waiting isn't passive when you've already moved on. It's just time catching up. 3 months after Christmas, I received confirmation that the condo would be refinanced or surrendered. Cyril couldn't qualify a loan. The property was listed quietly without celebration. No videos, no announcements, no applause. Just another asset returning to the market. The house followed soon after. Downsized, reduced, not because they wanted to let go, but because they had to. I didn't watch. I didn't ask. I focused on my life, on work that finally felt like mine, on friendships that didn't require justification, on evenings that ended without tension lingering in the air. One night, as I sat on my balcony watching the city lights blink on, I realized something quietly profound. I wasn't angry anymore. Not numb. Not triumphant. Just done. Done explaining. Done hoping. Done carrying what wasn't mine to begin with. The final message came months later. An email. Short. No subject line. "We should have protected you too." I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed my laptop. Some realizations come after damage is irreversible. They don't heal. They acknowledge. And sometimes acknowledgement arrives too late to matter. But that doesn't mean it isn't real. It just means it isn't owed a response. There's a strange kind of grief that arrives after the damage is already done. Not the loud kind with tears and raised voices, but the quiet kind that sneaks in when you realize you no longer want what you once begged for. That grief hit me the morning I woke up and didn't feel the urge to check my phone. No alerts. No legal updates. No family messages hiding behind neutral language. Just sunlight creeping through the blinds and the sound of the city waking up below. For the first time since Christmas, nothing was demanding my attention. And instead of relief, I felt hollow. Not because I missed them, but because a part of me had finally accepted that there would never be a moment where they gathered around a table, looked at me and said we were wrong. That scene only exists in stories. Real life offers quieter endings. The legal process continued without my involvement. My attorney handled everything, forwarding only what required confirmation. Each update sounded more procedural than personal, which told me exactly where things stood. The family trust was being dissolved, not restructured, not rebalanced. Dissolved. Too many inconsistencies. Too many signatures that couldn't be justified. Too many assumptions built on the belief that I would never challenge them. Institutions don't respond well to assumptions. They respond to proof. Grant tried one last time to reach me, not directly but through someone else. A cousin I barely spoke to sent a message framed as concern. "He's not doing well," she wrote. "He feels like he failed you." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Then he finally understands something, I wrote back. That was it. I didn't elaborate. I didn't soften it. Because clarity doesn't require padding. The next unexpected shift came from Cyril. She showed up where I didn't expect her at my work event. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked smaller somehow, less polished. The confidence she usually wore like armor had cracks now. She waited until I stepped away from a group conversation before approaching. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I studied her face. Not with anger. With curiosity. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked. She swallowed. "I didn't know how bad it was," she said. "I really didn't." I nodded. "That's true," I replied. "You didn't know. But you also didn't ask." Her eyes flicked away. "They didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "That doesn't undo it," I replied calmly. She hesitated, then said the words I hadn't expected. "They're scared." I felt something loosen inside my chest. Not guilt. Release. "They should be," I said quietly. She looked at me like she wanted to argue. But something stopped her. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked. I thought about it. Really thought. "Yes," I said finally. "Stop speaking for them. And stop expecting me to clean up what they broke." Her shoulders sagged. "I miss my sister," she said. I met her eyes. "You miss what I provided," I replied. "Not who I was." That hurt her. I could tell. But it was the truth. And the truth, once spoken, has a way of settling whether people like it or not. She didn't follow me when I walked away. That felt like progress. Or an ending. Maybe both. Time passed differently after that. Without constant tension. Days stretched instead of snapping. I stopped replaying old conversations. Stopped imagining alternative outcomes. Stopped wondering what I could have done differently. Because the answer was simple. I could have stayed silent. And I chose not to. The financial consequences finally became public, not through scandal but through absence. The condo sale never closed. The listing vanished quietly. The house didn't sell at the price they needed. They downsized. Moved. The family name, once tied to stability and quiet respect, began losing its shine, not because of rumors, but because consistency vanished. People noticed, not because I told them, but because I stopped covering. That realization came to me one evening as I sat with a friend who had known my parents for years. She stirred her drink slowly and said, "You were always the one holding things together, weren't you?" I smiled faintly. "I didn't know that was my job," I said. She nodded. "They never told you because if you knew, you might have quit." That sentence stayed with me. I might have. I should have. But timing matters. And so does readiness. The final legal document arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Confirmation that my name had been fully removed from all shared assets. No obligations. No entanglements. No expectations. I signed it digitally, sent it back, and closed my laptop. That was it. No ceremony. No applause. Just a quiet click. That night, I walked through my apartment with a strange sense of ownership, not just of space, but of self. Everything here reflected me. Not what I provided. Not what I supported. Just who I was. I slept deeply. No dreams. No tension. Just rest. Weeks later, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a familiar object, a small photo album. Mine. The one I'd made years ago with printed memories, trips, quiet moments. Tucked inside was a note in Marianne's handwriting. "I thought you'd want this back." Nothing else. No apology. No explanation. Just that. I stared at the note for a long time. Then I placed the album on a shelf, not out of nostalgia, but acknowledgement. Some things deserve to exist without control attached to them. That was the last contact. No more messages. No more attempts. No more quiet pressure. I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete. And that surprised me. Because for so long I thought justice would feel loud. Dramatic. Satisfying in a way movies portray. But real resolution doesn't shout. It settles. And once it does, it leaves room for something else. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but freedom. Freedom doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in fragments. In moments so small you don't notice them until later. Like realizing you haven't checked your credit report in weeks, or that the word home no longer triggers a defensive reflex. I was in the middle of an ordinary workday when the email came. Subject line, request for comment. I didn't open it right away. Something in my chest tightened, not fear, not anger, but recognition. This wasn't family anymore. This was outside eyes. Public ones. When I finally clicked it, the message was polite, clinical, and dangerous. A regional business reporter had been reviewing recent filings tied to a collapsed real estate transaction. My name appeared briefly in early documents before disappearing from final ownership records. That alone wouldn't matter, except the trail showed unauthorized access, amended trusts, and a reversal citing misrepresentation. They wanted my side. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. For years, my story had been told quietly, selectively, in rooms I wasn't invited into. Now, someone wanted it on record. I called my attorney. Her response was immediate and firm. "You are not obligated to protect anyone anymore," she said. "But if you speak, you must speak cleanly. Facts only. No emotion." I agreed. Not because I wanted exposure, but because silence had already cost me too much. We drafted a short statement together. Precise, unemotional, documented. I approved it without revision. 2 days later, the article ran. It wasn't sensational. That's what made it devastating. No dramatic headlines. No accusations. Just a timeline of filings, reversals, and the quiet removal of a co-borrower who never consented. People who knew how to read between lines understood exactly what it meant. The response was swift. Not public outrage, but professional distance. Contracts paused. Invitations stopped. Doors that once opened easily for my parents suddenly required extra steps, extra verification, extra explanations. Reputation doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes. I found out about the first consequence through a third party. A former family friend, someone who'd watched me grow up, ran into me at a cafe. She hesitated before speaking. "I didn't know," she said quietly, "about what they did." I nodded. "Most people didn't," I replied. She sighed. "People are asking questions now." That was enough. I didn't need details. I wasn't interested in punishment. I was interested in permanence. That same week, Cyril reached out again. This time she didn't ask to talk. She asked to apologize. We met in a neutral place, not my apartment, not hers. Somewhere public, quiet, unavoidable. She looked different, less certain. "I didn't understand the full extent," she said quickly as if rehearsed. "They kept things vague. I didn't think." "I know," I said, holding up a hand. "You didn't think." Silence stretched between us. She fidgeted with her cup. "They're blaming you," she said softly. I almost laughed. "Of course they are," I replied. "It would be strange if they didn't." She flinched. "They say you exposed them." I met her eyes. "I documented the truth," I said. "Exposure requires exaggeration." I didn't add anything. Her shoulders slumped. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted. "That's because it's not yours to fix," I said gently. She swallowed. "What happens now?" she asked. "For you," I said. "Or for them?" "For all of us," she whispered. I considered the question. "For me," I said finally. "Nothing changes. I already left." She nodded slowly, absorbing that. "And them," she pressed. I stood, slipping on my coat. "They learn what happens when you build your future on someone else's silence." She didn't stop me when I walked away. At work, things shifted, but not in the way I feared. Instead of suspicion, I encountered respect. Colleagues who had known fragments of my story began seeing the full outline, not as gossip but as context. One senior partner pulled me aside after a meeting. "I didn't know you went through that," he said. "You handled it professionally." That word, professionally, meant more to me than sympathy ever could, because it acknowledged something my family never did. Competence, autonomy, boundaries. The past kept surfacing in strange ways. An old neighbor reached out to ask if I was okay. A former teacher sent a brief note saying she was proud. Even an aunt, one who had always hovered on the edges, sent a message that simply read, "I see it now." I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because acknowledgement doesn't always require response. The most unexpected consequence arrived in the form of a legal notice addressed to my parents. A civil inquiry, not criminal, not explosive, but thorough, the kind that asks uncomfortable questions slowly and publicly. I found out through my attorney, who forwarded it without comment. I stared at the document longer than I expected, not with satisfaction, with distance, because once upon a time, I would have felt responsible for this, for their stress, for their fear, for the unraveling of the image they worked so hard to maintain. But that sense of obligation had quietly expired. The following months felt almost unreal. Life stabilized. No more surprises. No more waiting for the next shoe to drop. I traveled without guilt, slept without tension, planned without factoring anyone else's expectations into the equation. And then came the message I'd been half expecting. From Marianne. Not through intermediaries. Not through implication. Direct. I never meant for it to go this far. I stared at the screen. Typed. Deleted. Typed again. Then stopped. Because intention had never been the issue. Impact had. I replied with one sentence. It went exactly as far as it needed to. No emojis. No punctuation softened. She didn't respond. Weeks later, I learned they were selling the house. Not downsizing. Selling. The place that held decades of holidays, photos, rehearsed smiles. Gone. It felt symbolic. But symbols only matter if you're still emotionally invested. I wasn't. I moved forward. Quietly. Deliberately. With clarity. And then something strange happened. I stopped telling the story. Not out of fear, but because it no longer defined me. When people asked about my family, I answered briefly and redirected. When curiosity surfaced, I didn't feed it. Because healing isn't about retelling pain. It's about reducing its relevance. One evening, while organizing paperwork, I came across the original storage unit key. The one that had started everything. Cold metal. Unremarkable. I turned it over in my hand, then dropped it into the trash. Not ceremoniously. Not angrily. Just finished. Somewhere along the way, I realized the truth no longer needed defending. It stood on its own, and I stood apart from it. There is a moment after everything ends when you expect something to happen. A call, a confrontation, an apology dramatic enough to feel like justice. But nothing comes. And that silence, when you're no longer waiting for it to break, is how you know you're free. Months passed, not in milestones, not in dramatic shifts, but in the steady rhythm of normal days. Mornings where I woke without bracing myself. Afternoons where my phone stayed quiet without making my pulse jump. Evenings where I made plans without calculating who would be offended by my absence. For the first time in my life, my calendar belonged to me. I didn't hear from them again, not directly. No pleading messages. No last-ditch attempts at reconciliation. What filtered through mutual connections was enough. They were struggling, not financially ruined, not destitute, not punished in some cinematic way, just diminished. Their authority cracked, their certainty gone. They had to explain things now, to banks, to attorneys, to people who once trusted them without question. And every explanation came with a pause, a hesitation, a moment where the story no longer flowed cleanly, because the truth had teeth. I used to think consequences were loud. I learned they're quiet, the kind that follows you into rooms you once dominated, The kind that changes how people listen when you speak. I wasn't there to see it, and that was the point. One afternoon, while clearing out old digital files, I found a folder labeled Family. Photos, documents, messages I'd archived years ago because deleting them felt too final. I opened one photo at random. A holiday from years back. Everyone smiling. Me on the edge of the frame, half-cropped, holding a dish no one remembered who made. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the folder and deleted it. Not out of anger, out of accuracy. That image no longer represented my life. I started building new rituals. Small ones. Sunday mornings became slow breakfasts and long walks. I learned which cafes felt welcoming instead of performative. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected because I was always busy holding things together for other people. One night, a friend asked casually, "Do you miss them?" I thought before answering. "I miss the idea of what I thought we were," I said, "but not the reality." She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. Because some families aren't broken by conflict. They're broken by imbalance. And balance, once restored, doesn't require return. Work flourished. Not because I pushed harder, but because I wasn't dragging invisible weight behind me anymore. I spoke more clearly, negotiated without hesitation, declined without guilt. A senior colleague once remarked, half joking, "You don't second-guess yourself." I smiled. "That's new," I said. He didn't know how true that was. The last ripple came unexpectedly. A certified letter arrived one morning. Not hostile, not demanding, just formal. It stated that my parents were dissolving remaining shared trusts and updating their estate documents. My name wasn't mentioned. Not removed, not included. Simply absent. I stared at the page longer than necessary. Then I felt something I didn't expect. Relief. Because for the first time, the erasure was honest. No pretending. No half-inclusion designed to keep leverage. They had finally accepted what I already knew. I was no longer part of the structure they built, and that structure no longer had access to me. I signed nothing, responded to nothing, let it pass. A few weeks later, I stood in my apartment, sunlight spilling across the floor, holding a mug I liked, wearing clothes I chose, surrounded by objects that belonged entirely to me. No shared history embedded in the walls. No unspoken expectations humming under the surface. Just quiet. I thought back to that first moment, the keys, the laughter, the way I felt smaller without anyone raising their voice. I understood something then that I hadn't before. Power doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from documentation, from patience, from refusing to react until reaction is no longer necessary. I didn't take anything from them. I took myself back, and that was enough. If you've ever been made to feel like an accessory in your own life, if you've ever been erased quietly, politely, strategically, know this. You don't have to scream to reclaim your name. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is walk away with clarity and let the truth speak for itself. That's where my story ends. Not with closure they offered, but with peace I chose. If my story felt familiar in any way, if you've ever been quietly sidelined or forced to grow stronger in silence, leave a comment and share where you're watching from. Your voice matters more than you think. And if stories like this speak to you, stay connected by subscribing.